Okay. Good evening. Kalispera. I welcome you all here. This is the final session of a conference here at DCU on challenging Troika rule. And this conference has been co-organized by DCU and by Transform. This meeting will be co-chaired by myself. I'm Helena Sheehan. I'm a professor emeritus here at DCU, and I've organized the conference from this end. And also by Haris Golemis, who has initiated the whole idea of the conference and done much of the organizing for Greece. And he's been quite interesting to work with on this. He's a bundle of ideas and energy and really makes things happen. And the fact that we're all here tonight is testimony to that. So just a few words from Haris on behalf of Transform.
I think we have said a lot during the sessions of the conference. What I want to say is to thank first Elena, because she's behind all this. I mean, we didn't have any contacts in Ireland, and she did a marvelous job. Transform Network is really happy to be here. We hope to come back again. And as a legal representative, I thank you of Transform. I thank you very much for coming. And the same applies for my other identity as a Greek member of SYRIZA. And I'm very happy that we have also with us the president of our party, Alexis Tsipras. Thank you.
So we've had a really productive day. We've had some really fine presentations and discussions about Troika rule and the details of Troika rule. And as morning turned into afternoon, we tried to turn more to what is the possible alternative to Troika rule. And that's really what we want to concentrate on here this evening. I think this marks a chapter in the relationship between Ireland and Greece, and Ireland and Europe. Ireland has been very, very conscious of Greece since the start of the crisis. The Troika came first to you and then to us. And our eyes were on Greece all the time, right across the political spectrum. And, but especially on the Irish left, we saw Greece as an example of how all of this should be resisted. And we look to you with great admiration and respect. And then, since 2012, with the rise of SYRIZA, our eyes were even more focused on Greece than they ever were before. And we've seen Greece as not only a place of terrible tragedy unfolding, but also a place, a source of hope. And SYRIZA has raised the stakes, I think, for the rest of the European left. I think you've challenged us to raise our game. To be part of this common resistance to Troika rule. SYRIZA has been especially important to me because I see it as a synthesis of the best of the old and the new left. And I've been around on the left personally a long time and part of both the new left and the old left. And I see SYRIZA as representing a kind of critical continuity with the best of the left of the past, but with a fresh kind of look into the possible left of the future, which is what we need. And I think that SYRIZA is also part of this restructuring of the European left. And I hope that this conference is an important chapter for us to refocus on this European left as it's reshaping itself. And this is why it gives me particularly great pleasure to introduce Alexis Tsipras here tonight, because I see him as the forward face of this movement, which is gathering itself not only in Greece, but in Europe. And I think this is a challenge to us. So I present Alexis Tsipras, who is the president of SYRIZA, the coalition of in Greece, who is leader of the opposition in the Greek Parliament, and I hope the next Prime Minister of Greece, who is also Vice President of the Party of the European Left. And currently the European Left candidate for the presidency of the European Commission. So I'm very proud tonight to present Alexis Tsipras.
Thank you very much. It's the first time that I'm in Ireland. I haven't been in Ireland before. I only have been in Irish pubs in Greek islands, but not in Ireland, so it's a very good opportunity for me and for everybody from Greece to compare the situation, the current situation in your country, with the situation in our country, in Greece. And I want to thank Helena for the introduction, but also for the honor of inviting me to your conference. And let me congratulate you for its success, because in a single day you made it possible to deconstruct the so-called success story that, with great effort, the conservatives in Europe have tried to build at the conference of EPP, European People's Party, which was concluded only last Friday here in Dublin. The conference that, as you know, selected Mr. Jean-Claude Juncker as the party's candidate for the presidency of the European Commission. And I think that this is not a simple candidate. It is a candidacy that personifies austerity. It is the choice of Angela Merkel and Enta Kenny, your Prime Minister, and also the choice of the Greek Prime Minister, Mr. Samaras. So, I congratulate you that it took you only one day, to deconstruct the success story of the neoliberal consensus. A story which, since last December, has been seeking in your own country, in Ireland, in posthumous fame. In Ireland, that is a country with a public debt as a percentage of the GDP at 64% in 2009, that is already high compared to 25% in 2007, and came out of it at twice that figure, 125% of GDP in 2013. So what a marvelous success story, indeed. It is true that banks were rescued at the price of a memorandum that dismantled the country's social fabric and doubled the country's public debt. So, dear friends, why I'm talking about the EPP, the European People's Party conference? Because the succession of the two conferences, the conference of the European People's Party, that is the conference for the Europe of austerity and fear, and your own conference, the conference, let me say, for the Europe of hope and change, it is a succession of alternative choices. And the final dilemma at the polls in May is this. It's either them or the people's. Because for the first time next May, the vote of every citizen anywhere in Europe counts as never before. It is a vote with power and dynamics. It can and should change the course of Europe. Today, the neoliberalism and the German hegemony have led Europe to a strategic dead end. Today, that it has been proved on the ground that the policy of internal devaluation has failed, today that social cohesion is under threat, and not only cohesion, let me say, but democracy as well. Today that the very future of the European Union is under threat, it is imperative, as never before, that the peoples of Europe put an end to this recipe of failure, to a recipe that divides and destroys the European continent. And it divides it not only in terms of a surplus north and a deficit south, but also through a new wall of money between the creditors and the debtors. A wall of money which produces societies of the two-thirds, with one-third acting as if there were no crisis, and is getting richer from the crisis at the expense of the two-thirds pushed into poverty and social exclusion. The two-thirds of the lower classes and of the former middle class. This is the reality, and this is a reality made by austerity and memorandum. The same reality and prospect which we will all judge on election day in May 25. This time, people's vote can change the balance of political forces in Europe. And by the shifting it to the left, a green light could be lit in Europe for solidarity and democracy. A green light for the Europe of the left, and a red light for Mrs. Merkel's Europe of today. Such a change in the balance of forces would also determine the political direction of the solution to the crisis. Because the crisis is far from over. It is still underway, recycled by the neoliberal policies, and so long as it is recycled, the process of European integration is undermined, and the Eurozone itself is threatened. Because the policies of internal devaluation are not the solution of the crisis. They are the crisis. That's why we need to get over with those policies right now. And the European elections are the great opportunity for the people to send a very clear message of austerity rejection and clear answers to the dilemmas of the ballot box. Which are then those dilemmas that the European citizens will be asked to respond to in May 25? First dilemma: have the memoranda failed or not throughout Europe? Are the memoranda of austerity really success stories for Greece, Ireland, and the other countries? Or is it the case that they have brought back economic stagnation and social misery to Europe? Second dilemma: how are we going to get out of the crisis? By repeating the same mistake of the failed recipe, austerity and each country on its own, or with solidarity and growth? In the footsteps of the 1953 London Summit, London Debt Conference, which cancelled 60% of German debt. And the third dilemma: what kind of Europe do we want? That of Mrs. Merkel or the one of the left? Mrs. Merkel's Europe, which is not working, a Europe of austerity and poverty, or the Europe of the left, the Europe of employment, of human rights, of solidarity and democracy? Dear friends, I think that the answer that each of us will give to those three dilemmas at the ballot box, our own answer in May, will shape our own life and our children's lives tomorrow and in the years to come. In May, we will vote not for some parties, not for the balances in the national level, but we will vote for our life, based on the experiences of our lives so far. But of course, I'm not here to talk about your lives. You know better than me what happened in your lives. I'm today among you as a citizen of a country which is under a memorandum and is addressing citizens who know very well the meaning of that word, what means memorandum. And in that sense, as one of you, I ask myself, is today's Ireland a success story? Or is it just at dead cat's bounce, as the Economist described it last December? Last Friday, your fellow countryman, the U2's Bono, addressing to the European EPP party, the European People's Party conference, and he said, Troika screwed up the Irish, but we made it. So I think that Bono said only the half true. Only half the true. The other half is that the ones who made it were not the Irish, were not the Greeks, were not the Europeans, but were the European banks and the global bondholders. And let me explain why this is the whole true. Let's see how exactly our two countries made it. How is it today, 3 years later, the original problem which the memorandum was supposed to resolve in Ireland? Mortgage debt is far worse than it was 3 years ago. 1 in 5 home loans worth 25 billion euros and falling behind, most of them for more than 3 months. At the same time, the ratio of household debt to their disposable income still is 197%. As I mentioned earlier, public debt as a percentage of GDP was almost double in 2013, relative to 2009 at 125%. The public deficit as a percentage of the GDP was 7.2% in 2013. The European Commission forecasts it at 4.3% in 2015. It will have, in other words, violated the deadline of the Council for correction in the context of the excessive deficit procedure. The Irish economy has shrunk by 9% compared to 2009. Its growth prospects are far worse than before the memorandum. The IMF anticipates only a 2% annual GDP increase till 2019. And even worse, the memorandum has cut Ireland's best crop by forcing to emigration over 300,000 people between 2010 and 2013. Of them, about 40% were young, from 15 to 24. It has, in other words, deprived Ireland of about 14% of its labor force. Unemployment was kept at all times below 20%, only through emigration. So this was the success story. This was how you made it here in Ireland. And let me analyze what exactly Troika made it in Greece. According to data of the European Commission, poverty in Greece is today out of control. 34.6% of the population is threatened by poverty and social exclusion. This percentage has increased by 5 percentage points during 2008 to 2012. It is the fourth highest percentage in the European Union, after Romania, Bulgaria, and Latvia. The rate of the working poor is 15%. 6 of 10 citizens fail to visit their doctor because they cannot afford it. 3 million people out of a total of 11 million have no health insurance. 40% of the population saves on food in order to be able to buy medicine. According to the Workers' Confederation Institute of Labour annual report for 2013, at the end of that year, unemployment had reached the level of 61. That is around 30%. It is expected to reach 31.5 in this year, 2014. The life standard of the citizens has got worse by at least 50% compared to 2008 as a result of the salary and pension cuts, but also due to excessive taxation. Domestic demand was fallen by 31.3% since 2009, and in 2013 it went actually back to the 1999 level. In the 4 years of its implementation of the memorandum has sunk the Greek economy into a deep recession. Overall, Greece has lost over 25% of its pre-crisis national income. The memorandum has raised the public debt of our country, of Greece, to an unprecedented and unsustainable level. It has now reached the level of 176% of GDP, and the prediction is that in 2015 will be 205% of GDP. So, this is the situation. Greece is under humanitarian crisis due to the memorandum of austerity, and this is unacceptable figures for a European country. This is a stain to the European civilization. That is what we have accomplished thanks to the memorandum. And I think that these figures, of course with a lot of differences, are both for Greeks and Irish. So, dear friends, it is for all those reasons that we share a common interest in working together and in succeeding. First of all, the retroactive and direct recapitalization of the Irish and the Greek banks by the European Stability Mechanism. Despite the objection of Mr. Schäuble and Mr. Rechling, so that the respective amounts be exempted from the two countries' public debts. Secondly, working together and in succeeding, the realization of SYRIZA's proposal for a European debt conference. The debt crisis is a crisis of the Eurozone as a whole. It is a European in nature. It is not the sum total of national debt crisis. This is not a Greek debt crisis, this is not an Ireland debt crisis, it is a European one. So the management of the Eurozone debt crisis has transformed, for example in Ireland, a private debt crisis into a public debt problem. at the European Debt Conference, which we are proposing, we should reach an agreement on the operation of the European Central Bank as a lender of last resort, and this will also be on the table. We should give priority to the write-off, the cancellation of a significant portion of the nominal value of the most over-indebted member states in the Eurozone, as well as to the introduction of a growth clause for the repayment of the remaining debt. That proposal is not a trick. That proposal is not a trick for Europe's North to pay for the South. That proposal is an effort for the Eurozone to get out of the crisis definitely and collectively, so that to get rid of recession and stagnation. If we don't do that, then that would prevent Europe's balanced growth. It would also be a permanent systemic risk for Eurozone, a permanent window of market speculation. Dear friends, the fact that there is no success story as a serious and credible political argument regarding Ireland is not something that only I happen to maintain. It is not either something concluded only by your conference. It has been reconfirmed by the official report of the European Parliament on the role of the Troika in the memorandum countries by the two co-reporters. That's why there is no doubt that Troika has no place in Europe. That's why there is no doubt that Troika actually leading Europe to division and polarization. They dissolve social cohesion, they shrink democracy, they spread the humanitarian crisis. They are a point of shame for European civilization. And that's why we have a choice in May 25 to reject the jab. Dear friends, in the May election, the citizens will decide about Europe and their lives, choosing among three alternative poles. The first pole, let me say, is that of neoliberal no alternative. Do you remember there is no alternative of Mrs. Thatcher? Now, this expression, there is no alternative, belongs to Mrs. Merkel. She is at the head of this pole, of the neoliberal pole, of no alternative. However, in the race of the presidency of the Commission, she is represented by Mr. Jean-Claude Juncker and Mr. Schulz at the same time, the Social Democrat. The Social Democrats who became day by day less socialists and more neoliberal. Mr. Juncker and Mr. Schulz are the ones who were eager to support and practically enforce the disastrous policies of internal devaluation in Europe. The doctrine of austerity everywhere and always. Of course, now that we are in a pre-election period, some of them pretend that they know nothing about the crime. One of those is Mr. Schulz. And I will take the opportunity to ask Mr. Schulz directly. In Greece, he supports and is also supported by PASOK, the party that bears the fundamental political responsibility for the memorandum. And for the reason it has found itself barely alive today, supported only by 3–4% of the electorate, far away from the 44% in the parliamentary elections of 2009. So, the question to Mr. Schulz is this. Is this policy, the policy that PASOK implement as a partner in the right-wing government of Mrs. Samaras, is this policy right? The policy of internal devaluation, the policy of labor deregulation, privatizations, and fiscal austerity. Is it right or is it wrong? It must be immediately abandoned. I don't believe that Mr. Schulz will answer my question, but I think that, true, we have to put the dilemmas and ask the crucial questions throughout the next elections, because it's the first time that European left plays a crucial role. We are in the field of the fight at the European level, and it's the first time that we could make the questions, even though we don't believe that our opponents will answer these questions. So this is the one pole, the pole of the neoliberal, there is no alternative, that's represented by the EPP party and Social Democrats. What's the second pole? The second pole is that of the extreme and populist right and neo-Nazism, unfortunately. These are, let me say, the orphans of Mrs. Merkel's austerity. They pretend to be against the memoranda and against the political system, but it's not true. They make use of a populist political discourse. They hide themselves behind the people, the people's anger, against corruption, against injustice, against poverty and austerity. They hide their own hatred against the other. The left-winger, the heterodox, the Roma, the homosexual. But just because they are hiding and pretending, this is why they are more dangerous. Their political plan is simple and simplistic, returning to the Europe of national antagonisms and confrontations, going back even further than the deep darkness of neoliberalism, going back to the blood of Nazism. However, the peoples of Europe, thanks to their collective memory, I believe that they will never allow them to return. They will never allow the return of fascism in the European continent. Fascists and Nazis will be isolated. But this is the second pole, and we have to make our arguments not only against the first pole, the pole of the forces that implement the current neoliberal and austerity policies, but also against the threat of neo-Nazism in Europe. And the third pole is our own pole, is the pole of the anti-austerity and European left. Let me say that this is the anti-austerity pole of democracy. European left is the only democratic alternative to neoliberalism. We don't want to dissolve Europe. We want to unite and change Europe. Because the left can, should be, and already is, in Ireland, Greece, and elsewhere, a political force to govern, and believe me, not only to protest, but also to govern, believe me, that is very good for the people. We are the only choice for the democratic, ecological, and social refoundation of Europe. And let me say, the strategic goals which shape our four great political priorities. First political priority, the democratic reorganization of the European Union, because Europe will not be either social or ecological if it is not democratic. Democracy in Europe is in retreat, and the European Union will either be democratic or will not exist. We should extend the scope of public intervention and popular participation in European policy making. We should restore the fiscal role of national parliaments that has been deprived of by the so-called European semester. There is no such thing as national sovereignty without popular sovereignty, without democracy and the empowerment of its direct and representative institutions. The second priority, the second great political priority, is the ending of austerity in order to end the crisis with growth for Europe. That means immediate end to austerity and coordinated reflation of the European economies. A European New Deal for the balanced and sustainable growth is necessary, so that to create new, steady, and decently paying jobs, funding research and innovation, technology and infrastructure. We need to revise the European financial framework to facilitate growth by giving to the European Central Bank the role of a genuine central bank, making it lender of last resort for member states and not only for banks. By introducing a European Glass-Steagall Act to separate commercial and investment banking activities and risks. The third priority is the gradual ecological transformation of the production process by guaranteeing, first of all, the full implementation of the European acquis on the environment that would enable us to confront the ecological crisis that the Troika has added to the financial crisis, and also to narrow the sustainability gap between the European North and South. And the fourth priority is to reform of the European legal framework on immigration. This for us means that, among other things of course, a review of the spirit as well as the letter of the so-called Dublin II regulation that would make it possible to tackle the question of the asylum seekers and in a broader context the question of immigration as a European human rights issue with proportional distribution of burdens among the countries, among all the countries of Europe, through solidarity and not through suppression that produces humanitarian tragedies in the Mediterranean, like this in Lampedusa or like this in Pharmakonis in Aegea. So, dear friends, it's been 2 months since we began. I think that our fight is not a simple fight, it's a very difficult fight, but I'm very optimistic. I believe that the candidacy of the European left for the presidency of the European Commission can only have this meaning, to change our lives by changing Europe. And I'm very optimistic because I know very well that we are carrying in our luggage the people's struggles in our countries and all over Europe for a better life. Thousands of working people, intellectuals and ordinary men and women have sacrificed their lives in those struggles, have sacrificed their lives for a Europe of peace and democracy, for a Europe of human rights, for a Europe of labor and culture. This is the motto, our motto: we create the future by changing the present. Because never before in its post-war history has Europe sunk so deep in the darkness. We don't want this Europe. This is the Europe we're going to change. When they draft memoranda, we draft the future. When they sow fear, we give new flesh to hope. Dear friends, allow me to save for the end of my speech tonight a favorite quote of a great American politician of Irish descent, Robert Kennedy, but I think it was not him. It was not his. It was a quote from a great Irish writer and socialist, Bernard Shaw. It says, you see things and you say why, but I dream things that never were, and I say, why not? Thank you very much for your attention.
It gives me particular pleasure to hear Alexis Tsipras stand here in Ireland speaking about Ireland, because in the last 2 years I've read a number of interviews he's given and a number of speeches he's given, and I've written a series of emails saying, what about Ireland? Because there was this a constant theme of solidarity with the South and right down with the debt of the South. So I said, what about Ireland? What about our debt? Our debt is the most odious of them all. And anyway,
so this is a question I want to make to you. What do you feel? You are in the north or in the south of Europe?
There's more to all this than geography. Geography is not. It's like the way they talk about the West.
Okay.
It's an ideological thing, so not a geographical thing.
It's a Mediterranean country with rain.
Yeah. With a lot of rain, but
something like that.
But fortunately, today we brought sun in your country.
Yes. So, okay, it's been a long day for all of us here. So what I propose is that we have a Q&A of about 10 minutes. Is that okay with everybody? Okay? So, who would like to be the first in? Roger.
I'm sure this is going to be about the economic issues, but I want to ask you about what's going on in the Ukraine and the attitude of your organisation to what's happening there, because to give you a little bit of background, I belong to an organisation that's opposed to the process of the militarisation of Europe.
Of that?
The militarisation of Europe. And in particular, for example, the use of Shannon Airport, where millions of US troops land in our country to take part in wars all over the world, and possibly will again use Shannon to send American troops to take part in a war in the Ukraine. What would your overall view be towards the process of the militarisation of Europe? You know, just finally, you know that 7,000 Irish people died fighting for the British Union in the last Crimean War. 1/3 of all those died for the British. So there's a certain element of iffiness about unions that have a military dimension.
All together or one by one? What do you prefer?
Well, yeah, okay. So we'll ask a few and then you can come together. Okay. Yes.
Thanks for coming to visit us. I was just wondering what you think of the role of social
Okay, social movements.
The role of social movements.
Yeah. Brendan.
We all hope that the European left will gain a majority in the European Parliament. But in the event that the European left does not gain a majority in the elections, what should the left do?
Okay.
Challenging questions.
I don't believe that it will be happen, but I will answer your question.
Okay, Kieran.
First of all, I hope very much that you do become the Prime Minister of Greece, because I think it will lift the spirits of the left throughout Europe. But can I just ask you a question on strategy? Your basic argument was that you want to see a European debt conference similar to what happened in London in 1953 that would write off European debt. There are differences today. Capital is more financialised. There may be conservatives in Germany who win the election. So my question is, I mean, obviously, I hope you can do that and you get such a debt conference. But let's assume for the moment that that debt conference does not write off the debt of Ireland or of Greece. Are you for going to the Greek Parliament in the event that you have a majority and saying that the Greek Parliament, by democratic vote, would unilaterally cancel all of or part of the debt if the European Debt Conference does not give you the debt relief?
Okay, let's try to answer some of these questions and then...
Okay, yeah, so before there are too many. Okay.
Okay, first of all, the answer about Ukraine. I think that this is what happens in Ukraine is unacceptable. First of all, we had a change out of the constitution. I don't support Yanukovych, not either Tymoshenko. I don't like to support oligarchs, but at the same time I think that the only solution that could be in a country, in a sovereignty country, it's a democratic solution with the popular sovereignty and democracy. And I'm very, very afraid about developments in Ukraine, not only because maybe it will be a new division in Europe, a new Cold War between Russians and US, West and East, but also for the rising up of the neo-Nazis in Ukraine. I think that is unacceptable for European Union to accept a government in which there are partners that salute Nazis in the Nazis way, that they have already begun to say that the other nations are not acceptable in Ukraine. And as I know, they started in a violent way against Jews, against communists, against the minorities in Ukraine. But of course, in your questions, I think that the answer is that the only solution could be only in a peaceful way of negotiations between Russia and United States in the framework of the international law. And we believe that the only acceptable solution will be a peaceful solution, not with armies, and guns in Ukraine. But of course, it's a more complicated issue because you know that a great part of Ukraine has a Russian language population, especially in Crimea, that was given to Ukraine by Khrushchev in 1954. So I think that the developments in Kiev were not acceptable for the Russians, and I can understand this position. But I cannot understand that the solution could be a new war in the center of Europe. But it's a very complicated issue, and I think that the first we have to do as European left is to declare that the neo-Nazis are not acceptable in our continent once again. The other question was about the role of the social movements. Let me say that it's a very, very important role, but I want to be sincere. In Greece, we had a paleria. Do you know the word paleria of social movements? Tides of social movements during after the memorandum in 2010, 2011, 2012. But now we have the amboti. This is the truth. We had the very important movement of the squares against the memorandum. It was not only a movement, but it was a lesson of real democracy, direct democracy for everybody, and also for the parties and our party. It was very important to try to communicate with people and to try to take decisions all together in a democratic way. And I think that this was very, very important for the anti-austerity and anti-memorandum movement in Greece. But after the elections of 2012, I think that the most of the people disappointed. The most of the people are under depression. They don't believe that it is very easy to change the situation. All the opinion polls in Greece says that SYRIZA will be the next government. The majority of the people believe that SYRIZA will be the next government. But our difficulty is that at the same time the majority doesn't believe that it will be easy for the SYRIZA government to change this depression situation in Greece. And I believe that a threat for SYRIZA is this way of thinking that a lot of people may have after the results of 2012. That the solution could be in one day, in one voting day, in the elections. This is not true. Because a left government in Greece, a SYRIZA government, would only succeed if people will mobilize together. And we will need the mobilization of the people much more after the elections than before the election that we will win. So I think that it is very, very important, the role of social movements. And I believe that the way to try to regain our sovereignty and democracy and to stop austerity, it depends on the people mobilization, not only before but also after the elections. The third question was about the EL majority, if this not happened in the next European elections. As I see till now, we got it well. The prediction says that maybe left will be the positive surprise of the next elections. We had 30-something in 35 members in the European Parliament, and the predictions are that we will have above 60 members in the next European Parliament, 65. And so we will be the third pole and the third group in the next European Parliament. And this is very important, because if this happens, we will smash the consensus between these three political families in Europe, the Conservatives, the EPP, Social Democrats and Liberals. And I'm very optimistic that will be the third political group. But this is not only an accountable issue. I think that the most important will be if first of all, in the countries of the periphery, and especially in Greece, in Ireland, in Spain, in Portugal, we'll try to change the balances. And I believe that the possibility of a great win, great victory of SYRIZA in Greece, it will play a very crucial role, not only for the Greek situation, not only for Greece, but also for all European countries, because it will be like a domino effect. It will be a paradigm. And of course, it depends on the success of this procedure. But I believe that if in one country there is an alternative government supported by the people, with a very clear mandate to stop austerity, and if this supported also by the peoples of the other countries in whole Europe, maybe this will create a new framework in Europe. And I will explain what I'm meaning. I will explain, and at the same time I will answer in the fourth question. You asked if it will be possible to convince the European partners to organize this debt conference, and if they will not convince, what we're going to do. So, I will answer that in our strategy, we have two very strong arguments. The first argument is that we are the only one who describes a viable solution. A viable solution not only for the debtor countries, as Greece as well, but also for the creditors. If you imagine that Greece will continue in austerity, what we're going to do? In 2015, we will have a public debt about 205% of GDP. Who will be able to pay these accounts? The problem with the memorandum in Greece were not only that it was a disaster in the social level. It was not only that it created a humanitarian crisis, but also that it failed in the economic figures, in the economic levels. Before the memorandum, we had a debt about 124 of GDP. After three consecutive years of implementation, we have 175. And of course, after a very, very strong program of cuts and destroy of social security, we still have a very important financing gap. And this is the strength of these programs. We will need new loans, because there is no way if you take new loans and new loans only to repay the old loans. This is a vicious cycle, not a solution. So, the first argument is that we have a viable, realistic solution. And it will be very difficult for our partners in Berlin to refuse this proposal only because they were the country that they had a solution like that after the Second World War. Why to refuse something that it happened only for them? But let's say that they will refuse. What's the second argument that we have? The second argument is that Greece remains a systemic danger for Eurozone. Eurozone is like a chain with 17, 18 now links. If one link will break, chain will collapse. And this is the very important argument that our governments in Greece never try to understand. I don't know why, but they never negotiate. And our government, a left government with the people mandate to end austerity, we will do it for the first step. We will not negotiate with our partners in order to save Greek people for the humanitarian crisis. This is not something that we could negotiate with anybody. We believe that we're a democratic country, so if the people will vote for SYRIZA and a new democratic government create, they will vote to the parliament to end austerity and to try to put out a great part of population out of the humanitarian crisis. And then we will try to negotiate with our partners about a new agreement, a new loan agreement, based in our proposal for a cancellation of a great part of the debt, moratorium in the repayments, and growth clause. And this will be a very, very hard negotiation. I don't believe that it will be an easy procedure for us. It will not be a spring walk in the forest. It will be a very, it will be a very, very strong negotiation, but I believe that finally we will succeed just because we will have the supporting not only for Greek people but for all the majority of the peoples of Europe. A movement of solidarity will help us to succeed. Sometimes I used to say that in Europe we have an economic war. It's not like the other wars in the Second World War with a lot of victims, but we also have a lot of victims. We have 3 million people in Greece without security insurance. We have already lost 250 young people in emigration. They go abroad. 250,000. 250,000 people that they try to go abroad just only to find a viable solution for their lives. And the difference with the immigration wave that we had in the 60s, in the decade of 60s, is that now the most of them are high educated. And I think that the same happened in your country, in Ireland.
Definitely.
So we have victims in this financial war. But this is not a war between nations and between peoples. This is a war in which in the one field there is the forces of capitalism, of casino capitalism, the forces of financial markets, the banks, the bondholders, and in the other field is the forces of labor, peoples, young people, all peoples of Europe. And I absolutely believe that it will be very important for this war to win the fight in the front line. And where is the front line now? In the periphery. In our country, in your country, in Portugal, in Spain, in Italy. And if SYRIZA win, it will be a great development for the fight in the front line of this war. And maybe it will be the beginning to win the whole war. I'm not sure if I answered
yes.
in every question, but I tried.